Hello everyone. Suppose you travel back to World War I and serve as a German soldier. How would you survive 24 hours? It's a cold September night in Verdun, 1916. Mud soaks your uniform and the stench of mildew mingles with gunpowder in your nostrils. You are Karl Schultz, a private first class in the 12th Infantry Regiment 3rd German Army, huddled in a foxhole within the Wolf's Lair trench. Distant artillery rumbles low while the scent of freshly baked bread from your hometown bakery flickers in and out of your memory. This is the dawn of yet another 24-hour struggle in this hellish battlefield. The cold pierces like countless fine needles seeping through your thin army blanket to chill your bones, rousing you from a muddled sleep. You shiver violently, teeth chattering uncontrollably, and instinctively pull the blanket tighter, only to feel damp cold against your hands. Rainwater from last night has seeped through the cracks in the trench ceiling, soaking the blanket halfway through. The foxhole you occupy is a hastily dug shelter barely large enough for one person to curl up in, its walls lined with sticky yellow soil. Mixed with gravel and unknown debris, a touch of your hand comes away covered in mud. You slowly sit up, moving cautiously to avoid dislodging dirt from the ceiling. Your uniform clings to your skin, cold and stiff, reeking of thick mildew and lingering gunpowder. These two odors blend into the battlefield's unique stench, one you've long grown accustomed to yet still find nauseating in fleeting moments. Your eyes adjust to the darkness after a moment, faintly making out the outline of the trench beyond the foxhole and occasional faint glimmers in the distance. Those are warning lights from the French positions. Your stomach growls with hunger, so you fumble in your uniform's inner pocket and pull out half a piece of black bread. Hard as stone, its edges dry and cracked, it's the leftover from yesterday's lunch. Something you've guarded carefully. You bring it to your mouth, gnawing slowly with great effort. The rough texture grates against your gums, causing a dull ache. To accompany the bread, you have the last dregs of substitute coffee in your canteen, ground from roasted barley. It has no hint of coffee's aroma, only a bitter, burnt taste. You unscrew the canteen cap and take a small sip. The icy liquid slides down your throat, sending another shiver through you, but it eases the hunger slightly. The night is far from quiet. Sporadic gunshots ring out from the French lines in the distance. Bang bang, spaced far apart yet eerily clear. They serve as a constant reminder. This is a battlefield and death could strike at any moment. Closer by, the barbed wire of your own position whistles in the night wind, occasionally punctuated by the clinking of metal against metal. Beyond that, there are the snores and coughs of sleeping comrades and the scurrying sounds of rats in the trench. The rats here are fat and bold, showing no fear of humans. They often steal soldiers' rations, and some even bite the ears of sleeping men. Karl, your turn on watch. A deep voice beside you makes you jump. You look up to see your comrade Hans bending over at the foxhole entrance. An unhealed shrapnel wound on his cheek stands out in the dim light, the skin around it swollen and crusted with dried blood. Hans' eyes are heavy with exhaustion. He rubs his red, frozen nose and hands you his rifle. French scouts were active last night. Keep a close eye on their snipers ahead. Don't let your guard down. You take the rifle, flinching slightly at the cold metal. It's a Mauser Gur 98, which has been with you for a year. Its barrel is polished smooth from use. You know it as well as the back of your hand. You nod, responding hoarsely, "Got it. Go rest." Hans grunts in acknowledgement, turning to crawl into the adjacent foxhole. Soon steady snores fill the air. He is utterly exhausted. You stand up, brushing dirt off your uniform, and take a deep breath of frigid air before walking to the trench's firing step. The firing position is built with sandbags, leaving a small gap just wide enough to prop up the rifle and observe the front. You rest the rifle on the sandbags, peering through the scope at the French lines. The sky remains pitch black and the morning mist hasn't risen yet. You can only faintly make out the blurred outline of the French trenches and the warning lights planted among the barbed wire. Emitting a faint red glow, they flicker in the dark. You hold your breath, scanning every corner meticulously, daring not to relax for a second. The early hours of the morning are a peak time for enemy scouts and snipers. One careless move could cost you your life. Time creeps by and the sky gradually turns pale gray, with distant scenes starting to take shape. Morning mist rises slowly like a thin veil, shrouds the entire battlefield, rendering everything hazy and eerie. You lower your rifle, rub your sore eyes, and gaze eastward. where the sky has already tinged with a faint orange red. At that moment, a memory of your hometown flashes through your mind of a dawn just like this. In your small Bavarian town, the sun has just risen, casting golden light over the bakery's roof. Your mother stands at the bakery door wearing an apron, a gentle smile on her face. The thud of kneading dough echoes from inside, and the air is thick with the rich aroma of wheat, the warmest scent in your memory. You can even see your father leaning on his cane, standing under the old locust tree at the village entrance, gazing into the distance. He injured his leg while working in his youth, making it difficult for him to walk. Zehnter Karl. A sharp shout jolts you back to reality. Karl. A sharp shout jolts you back to reality. You snap out of your reverie and realize it's Sergeant Muller gathering the men for a briefing. 30 years old Sergeant Muller was once a factory worker. After enlisting, he rose to sergeant through his exceptional competence. His skin is dark, weathered by wind and sun, and his eyes are sharp and resolute, exuding an unshakable authority. You rush over and line up with the other comrades. Most of them are still half asleep. Pale, exhausted, their uniforms crumpled and caked in dirt and mud. Standing in front of the formation, Sergeant Muller speaks hoarsely. Snap to it! This morning's mission is to reinforce the parapet on the right trench. French artillery fire has been getting more frequent lately. We must ensure the bunker's support beams are secure. No mistakes allowed. Additionally, the logistics team will deliver today's rations and bandages this morning. Keep an eye out for them. Use bandages sparingly. Supplies are tight at the rear and priority goes to frontline assault units. Understood. Everyone responds in unison, their voices hoarse yet firm. Despite their exhaustion on the battlefield, orders are absolute. No room for defiance. After the briefing, you and your comrades begin preparing for defensive work. You first inspect your rifle. Disassemble the barrel, wipe every part carefully with a clean cloth to remove dirt and moisture. In the damp trench, rifles rust and jam easily, which can be fatal in combat. After cleaning the rifle, you take out several M1915 stick grenades and check if the fuses are intact. With a killing radius of 5 to 8 meters, these grenades are commonly used in trench warfare. You skillfully hang them on the ammunition belt around your waist. Hans has woken up too. He walks over to you and helps check the equipment together. Karl, what were you thinking about just now? You had a vacant look. Hans whispers, his voice still hoarse with the laziness of just waking up. Nothing, you shake your head and smile. Just remembering the dawns back home. Hans' eyes darken slightly. I miss home too, he says softly. The wheat fields, my mother's potato soup. He pauses, then adds, when this war is over, I'm going home and never leaving again. You pat him on the shoulder, not saying a word. You know how distant and luxurious those 4 words, when the war ends, sound right now. You and Hans lift a log together and head toward the right trench. Covered in moss, the log is wet and slippery, much heavier than you imagined. The mud in the trench reaches your ankles, making every step extremely difficult. You stumble forward deep in mud, one moment shallow, the next splattered all over, but oblivious to it. By now the morning mist has gradually lifted and the sun rises slowly, casting golden light over the battlefield. But this sunlight brings no warmth. Instead, it makes the mud and filth in the trench more starkly visible. Distant artillery continues to rumble, as if accompanying this cruel battlefield with a grim melody. You know a new day has begun, and what awaits you are unknown dangers and suffering. You and your comrades hadn't carried the logs far when you heard the creak of logistic soldiers pushing a cart. The tin cart struggled forward through the muddy trench, letting out a harsh screeching noise. Everyone's eyes turned toward the sound, glinting with a hint of anticipation. It was today's breakfast and supplies. The logistics team consisted of 2 young soldiers pushing a tin cart loaded with several large iron buckets and some packages. A few soldiers gathered around the cart, waiting eagerly for the distribution. Sergeant Muller walked over, exchanged a few words with the logistics soldiers, then organized everyone into a line. You and Hans stood at the end, waiting patiently. One comrade after another collected their breakfast, their faces lighting up with contentment. On the battlefield, a hot meal was the greatest luxury. Finally, it was your turn. You took a metal bowl and the logistic soldier filled it to the brim with hot mashed potatoes, topping it with a handful of diced carrots. The mashed potatoes steamed, releasing a faint aroma that whetted your appetite. Alongside it was a sausage, coarse-textured, clearly a substitute, but you were already grateful. You and Hans found a relatively clean spot to sit and dug in. The hot mashed potatoes slid down your throat, bringing a flicker of warmth that chased away some of the chill. Though the sausage was tough, it tasted decent. You wolfed down the food, finishing the bowl of mashed potatoes and the sausage in no time. After breakfast, the logistic soldiers handed out 2 boxes of matches and a roll of bandages to each person. You carefully tucked the matches and bandages into your uniform's inner pocket. These were battlefield essentials. Matches for warming up and lighting fires, bandages for dressing wounds. That's when you noticed the bandages were far fewer than usual. Only 1 roll per person compared to at least 2 before. You frowned and glanced at Sergeant Muller, who was arguing with the logistics soldiers, his face dark with anger. What's going on? Why so few bandages? Sergeant Muller's voice trembled with fury. The logistics soldiers looked helpless. I'm sorry, Sergeant, they replied. Higher command says bandages are prioritized for frontline assault units. Second-line positions have to make do. We're just following orders. Sergeant Muller cursed under his breath. Damn it. Turning to the men, he said sharply, make these bandages last. Don't use them unless it's a matter of life or death. Everyone nodded, their faces etched with resignation. On the battlefield, medical supplies were a matter of life and death. A shortage of bandages meant that a wound left untended could easily be fatal. You sat with Hans and the veteran Eric. At 35, Eric was a seasoned soldier who had fought in the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of the Marne, boasting rich experience. A long scar stretched across his face, left over from a shrapnel wound in the Somme. Eric pulled out a homemade cigarette, lit it, took a drag, then passed it to you and Hans. Made of hay mixed with a little tobacco, the cigarette was harsh tasting, but it offered a moment of respite. You know, Eric said slowly, his eyes clouding with fear and remembrance, the Somme was worse than this. Artillery shells fell like rain, dense enough to cover the entire position. I watched an entire squad get buried alive in the trench. Never found their bodies. We hid in bunkers, too scared to breathe, loudly fearing a direct hit. Hans paled, his body trembling slightly. Had enlisted in 1916, a new recruit who had never seen large-scale combat, his understanding of war's cruelty still shallow. You listened in silence. Though you hadn't witnessed it firsthand, you'd heard the stories. The Battle of the Somme was one of WWI's bloodiest, with catastrophic casualties on both sides. Bodies littering the battlefield as far as the eye could see. All right, that's enough, you said, patting Hans on the shoulder to comfort him. Right now we just need to focus on the task at hand and survive. Hans nodded, forcing a weak smile. After breakfast, you and your comrades began reinforcing the parapet on the right trench. Built from stacked sandbags, the parapet served to shield against enemy bullets and shrapnel. Due to the recent frequent French artillery attacks, many sandbags had been hit and were badly damaged, leaving gaps in the parapet that urgently needed repair. You and Hans formed a team tasked with carrying sandbags and logs. Filled with soil, the sandbags were extremely heavy. Together you lifted a sandbag and carefully placed it in a gap in the parapet. The logs were used to prop up the structure, preventing it from collapsing. Carrying the logs, you stumbled forward through the muddy trench, each step requiring immense effort. The moss on the logs was slippery. You nearly fell several times but managed to steady each other to avoid accidents. Mud in the trench reached your ankles, soaking through your socks and boots, numbing your feet with cold. Sweat streamed down your forehead, dripping onto the muddy ground and disappearing instantly. You gasped for breath, inhaling the frigid air which stung your lungs. Yet you dared not stop pushing on with the work. Reinforcing the parapet was a matter of life and death for everyone. It had to be completed quickly. The other comrades were also busy at a frantic pace. The entire trench echoed with the thud of moving supplies, the chant of laborers, and the gasps of exhausted soldiers. Sergeant Muller paced back and forth, directing everyone from time to time and warning them to stay safe. Hurry up. Make it snappy. Sergeant Muller's voice was hoarse yet powerful. The French could launch an artillery strike at any moment. We must finish before they do. Time crept by and soon it was past 10 o'clock. You had reinforced most of the parapet, leaving only a small section unfinished. You and Hans set down the log, wiped sweat from your brows, and prepared to rest for a moment. Suddenly a sharp whistling sound cut through the air in the distance. The sound of incoming artillery. Artillery! Take cover in the bunkers!
Sergeant Müller shouted urgently.
Everyone's faces turned ashen. They dropped their tools and scrambled toward the nearest foxholes. You and Hans raced to a nearby foxhole. Just as you dived inside, a deafening boom erupted. The first shell landed about 50 meters away, its massive impact shaking the entire ground. Dirt showered down from the trench ceiling, hitting your head and body. Mud thrown into the air by the explosion rained down, covering you from head to toe. You curled tightly into the corner of the foxhole, hands clamped over your ears, eyes squeezed shut. Your heart pounded wildly, threatening to burst. Despite a year of battlefield experience, you still couldn't overcome the fear of artillery barrages. Shells continued to fall one after another, the relentless booms ringing in your ears, leaving you dizzy and disoriented. You could hear the trench being hit mixed with the screams of comrades. These sounds merged into a macabre symphony of death. The artillery attack lasted 20 minutes. Each minute felt like an eternity. Your nerves were stretched to the breaking point, on the verge of collapse. Finally, the sound of gunfire faded and the battlefield fell into a brief silence. But this calm did not bring relief. Instead, it heightened your tension. You had no idea what dangers lay ahead. You slowly opened your eyes, removed your hands from your ears, and took a deep breath. A small section of the foxhole ceiling had caved in, leaving dirt and debris piled around you. You climbed out cautiously. The sight before you left you stunned. The right trench was unrecognizable, many sandbags blown apart and a huge gap torn in the parapet. The left trench was even worse. One section had completely collapsed with dirt and logs piled up. The vague shapes of comrades were visible beneath the rubble. Quick! Save them!
Sergeant Müller shouted.
His face was caked in mud, his eyes filled with urgency and grief. You and the other comrades rushed over, starting to dig through the collapsed dirt and logs. Your fingers were cut by sharp stones in the mud, blood mixing with the muck, but you were oblivious. Your only thought was to pull the buried comrades out as soon as possible. Over here. Someone's alive. A comrade yelled. You and the others hurried over, speeding up the digging. Soon a comrade's arm emerged. He was still alive. You kept digging, finally pulling him free. His leg was crushed by a log, the bone broken. His face was pale and he trembled in agony, yet he bit back his cries. You continued digging and found another buried comrade nearby. Tragically, he had no pulse. His face was blue, eyes wide open, clearly suffocated to death by the dirt. Seeing this, everyone fell silent. Grief hung heavy over the entire position. Sergeant Muller walked to the fallen comrade, gently closing his eyes. Turning to the men, he said, "Carry him to the rear's temporary cemetery. Take the wounded to the medical station for treatment. The rest of us, keep reinforcing the trench. We won't let our comrades die in vain." Everyone nodded, wiping tears from their faces, and returned to work. Looking at the dead comrade, your heart was filled with grief and anger. This damnable war had already claimed far too many lives. The work of reinforcing the trench continued until noon, and you and your comrades were completely exhausted. Sergeant Muller ordered everyone to stop and rest, preparing for lunch: cold black bread and canned meat. The canned meat was expired, emitting a faint sour smell when opened, but no one dared to waste it. On the battlefield, having food to eat was already a luxury. You sat by the trench, slowly gnawing on the black bread. The bread was still rock hard and hard to swallow, but you forced yourself to finish it. You needed to replenish your strength for the dangers that might lie ahead. You looked toward the medical station where the wounded comrade was receiving treatment. The medic was a young soldier using limited bandages to dress the wounded man's injury. With no anesthetics available, the wounded comrade trembled violently in pain, his forehead covered in cold sweat, yet he never cried out. You walked over to the medical station, took half a piece of black bread from your rations, and handed it to him. "Eat something to regain your strength," you said softly. The wounded comrade looked up at you, whispered "thank you" weakly, then took the bread and began to chew slowly. Hans joined you, holding a homemade cigarette and offering it to the medic. "You've had a tough time," Hans said. The medic took the cigarette, lit it, took a drag, and shook his head. "It's nothing, just doing my duty," he replied. "But we're short on bandages. I can't properly dress many wounds. If only we had anesthetics." You and Hans stood silently beside him watching as he tended to the wounded soldier, your hearts filled with helplessness. In this war, the lives of ordinary soldiers were as fragile as grass, liable to be snatched away at any moment. Sergeant Muller walked to the battalion headquarters telephone and began reporting the situation. "Battalion HQ, this is Wolf's Lair position. We came under heavy French artillery fire this morning. The left trench has collapsed with 2 casualties. Battalion HQ, this is Wolf's Lair position. We came under heavy French artillery fire this morning. The left trench has collapsed with 2 casualties." A muffled response came from the other end of the line, too faint to make out clearly. But from Sergeant Muller's expression, it was evident the reply was unsatisfactory. He hung up the phone and cursed angrily. "Damn it! A bunch of bastards!" You approached him and asked softly, "Sergeant, what did HQ say?" Sergeant Muller shook his head and sighed. "They said frontline troops are stretched thin, no reinforcements for us. Medical supplies are also prioritized for assault units. We'll have to fend for ourselves." Hearing this, disappointment weighed heavy on your heart. You knew that getting supplies and reinforcements was now a pipe dream. You and your comrades would have to rely on yourselves to hold this dangerous position. After lunch, just as you and your comrades were about to resume reinforcing the trench, a new order arrived from Battalion HQ. "Send 2 soldiers to reconnoiter the forward edge of the French positions, gathering intelligence on their firepower deployment and troop movements." Sergeant Muller fell into deep thought upon receiving the order. Reconnaissance was extremely dangerous, requiring penetration into the no-man's land between the 2 lines. Littered with shell craters, barbed wire, and the bodies of fallen soldiers, it was also patrolled by French snipers and scouts. One wrong move could mean death. Sergeant Muller glanced at the comrades around him, his gaze finally settling on you and Eric. "Carl, Eric, you 2 are assigned to this mission," he said. "Eric is experienced and Carl is quick on his feet. You make the perfect team." You and Eric exchanged a look, then nodded in unison. "Understood, Sergeant," you replied together. Though aware of the danger, you had no choice. Eric returned to his foxhole and fetched some equipment. He handed you a dagger and a pair of binoculars, then began applying camouflage paste to both of you, a mixture of soil and grease that effectively concealed your presence from the French. Eric spread the paste on your face, neck, and hands with quick, practiced movements. "Carl, remember, once we're in no man's land, stay close to my heels and don't make a sound," Eric said solemnly. "French snipers are deadly. Their eyes are as sharp as eagles. If we're spotted, we're done for. If danger strikes, stay calm and follow my lead." "I understand, Eric," you nodded, earnestly gripping your rifle and dagger tightly, your heart pounding with nervousness. This was your first reconnaissance mission. You felt a mix of fear and excitement. Sergeant Muller approached, handing you a small notebook and a pencil. "Record every detail you observe. Stay safe and make sure you come back alive." His eyes held a hint of concern. "Don't worry, Sergeant," Eric said. He then winked at you, signaling it was time to move out. You and Eric hunched over, carefully climbing out of the trench and slipping into a nearby shell crater. Left by a previous artillery strike, the crater was deep enough to provide good cover. Beyond it lay no man's land, a 300-meter wide stretch between the 2 armies, dotted with shell craters, barbed wire, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The air reeked of decaying corpses and gunpowder, a stench that made your stomach churn. You and Eric dropped to the ground and began crawling forward. The ground was covered in gravel, shrapnel, and wet mud, making crawling uncomfortable. Your skin was scratched by sharp stones, burning with pain, but you dared not stop. You followed Eric's lead, inching forward slowly. Your movements were light, barely making a sound, only the faint rustle of clothing against the ground. After crawling a short distance, you spotted the body of a French soldier. He was tangled in the barbed wire, his eyes wide open and his expression contorted in agony, apparently shot by a sniper after becoming trapped. It was the first time you'd seen an enemy soldier's body up close. Your stomach heaved and you nearly vomited. You quickly turned your head, unable to look. Eric noticed your reaction and patted your shoulder, urging you to stay calm. You took a deep breath, forcing your emotions under control, and continued following him. After advancing about 200 meters, Eric stopped, pointing to a large shell crater ahead. You and he crawled into it, hiding yourselves. The crater was only about 100 meters from the French trenches, close enough to clearly see their fortifications and the movements of their soldiers. You pulled out your binoculars and studied the French positions intently. The French were reinforcing their defenses. Several soldiers were carrying sandbags while others were setting up heavy machine guns. You counted 3 heavy machine guns in total, all deployed beside firing ports aimed toward your position. Additionally, some soldiers were carrying artillery shells, seemingly preparing for another bombardment. Eric took out the small notebook and pencil, meticulously recording the intelligence you'd gathered. 3 heavy machine guns deployed at left, center, and right firing ports. Approximately 20 soldiers reinforcing fortifications. 10 soldiers transporting shells. Once the notes were complete, Eric winked at you, signaling it was time to retreat. You and he slowly crawled out of the crater and began making your way back. Suddenly, a French soldier spotted you. He shouted loudly, then raised his rifle and fired in your direction. Bang! The bullet whistled past your ear, hitting a piece of shrapnel nearby with a sharp clink. Shit, we're spotted. Retreat! Eric yelled, raising his rifle and returning fire. Bang! Bang! Eric's shots rang out and the French soldier quickly ducked behind the trench. You and Eric seized the opportunity to retreat, crawling frantically toward your own lines. French gunfire erupted continuously, bullets whistling through the air around you. You could feel the cold breeze of bullets passing over your scalp, your heart flooded with terror. Fortunately, Eric's covering fire kept the French soldiers from daring to rush out. You and Eric raced forward, finally reaching your own trench. Sergeant Muller and the other comrades were waiting by the trench edge. Seeing you return safely, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Eric handed the notebook with the reconnaissance notes to Sergeant Muller. After reading it, Sergeant Muller nodded, patting you and Eric on the shoulders. Well done, Carl. Eric. This intelligence is crucial. It'll help us prepare for any French attack. You've done well. You and Eric collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, a wave of relief washing over you. That reconnaissance mission had been like walking through the gates of death. You touched your ear, it was still warm. The memory of the bullet whistling past your ear left you haunted, your heart still racing with fear. After returning to the position, you were completely exhausted and sat down to rest in your foxhole. Hans approached, handing you a canteen of hot water. Carl, are you okay? We were all worried when we heard the gunfire, he said, his eyes filled with concern. You took the canteen and drank several sips. The warm water gradually spread through your body, easing the chill. I'm fine, just tired, you replied with a faint smile, briefly telling Hans about the reconnaissance mission. Hans turned pale, repeating anxiously, "That was too close. Far too close." Eric had also returned to his foxhole. He pulled out his rifle and began cleaning it meticulously. His face was expressionless, as if the dangerous ordeal had just endured was merely an everyday occurrence. But you knew, Eric must have been just as nervous inside. Had simply grown used to masking his emotions with indifference. As he cleaned his rifle, Eric hummed a Bavarian folk song, a cheerful tune. Yet it sounded strangely desolate amid the cruelty of the battlefield. You realized Eric was homesick. Just then, the logistic soldiers pushed their tin cart over again, this time delivering letters from home. Letters from home. Come get your mail, one of them shouted. At the words letters from home, everyone perked up, swarming around the cart. For soldiers on the battlefield, home letters were their only spiritual sustenance. Receiving one meant learning news of their families and feeling the warmth of their love. You pushed your way through the crowd, searching for your name among the stack of envelopes. Soon you spotted one addressed to Karl Schultz, the familiar handwriting of your mother. Your hands trembled with excitement as you took the envelope, carefully tearing it open to pull out the letter paper. The paper was slightly crumpled, covered in your mother's neat handwriting. You read it eagerly. My dear Carl, my child. How are you? Mother misses you terribly. Everything at the bakery is well. I bake plenty of bread every day and the townsfolk take good care of us. I've knitted you a woolen sweater and sent it to your unit. I hope you receive it soon to ward off the battlefield cold. Your father's leg has improved, he can walk slowly now. Every day he stands under the old locust tree at the village entrance waiting for your return. Christmas is just over a month away. I've already started preparing the holiday feast. I'm waiting for you to come home and share our Christmas roast goose. Carl, you must stay safe. Father and I are counting the days until you're back. With all my love. Mother. Tears streamed down unbidden as you read her words. Her gentle lines washed over you like a warm current, bringing a long-absent warmth to your heart. You could almost see her kind smile. Your father leaning on his cane gazing into the distance and the warm glow of the bakery's lights back home. You remembered the day you left. Your mother had hugged you tightly, her tears soaking your uniform. Your father had patted your shoulder, urging you to take good care of yourself. Pulling out the small notebook and pencil you carried with you, you began writing back to your mother. Dear Mother, I was overjoyed to receive your letter. I'm doing well, please don't worry about me. Life in the unit is tough, but I'm taking care of myself. Thank you for the woolen sweater. I'm looking forward to receiving it. I'm so glad Father's leg is better. Tell him to rest more. I won't be able to come home for Christmas, but I'll be thinking of you and the roast goose. Mother, please take good care of yourself and Father. When this war ends, I'll come home and never leave you again. With all my love. Kai. After finishing the letter, you carefully sealed it in an envelope and handed it to the logistics soldier. You watched as his figure disappeared into the distance of the trench, your heart filled with a longing for peace. How you wished the war would end soon, so you could return home and reunite with your family. By now the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden afterglow over the battlefield, gilding the cold trench with a warm hue. But this warmth did nothing to dispel the chill in your heart. Distant artillery still rumbled faintly, a constant reminder that the war was far from over and danger lurked nearby. You sat in your foxhole staring at the setting sun, overcome with confusion and helplessness. As darkness fell, the logistics soldiers brought dinner. Hot soup and black bread. The soup was made with vegetable leaves, potato peels, and a little minced meat, simple yet surprisingly palatable. You and your comrades sat huddled together, silently sipping the soup and eating the bread. The atmosphere was even heavier than during the day. No one spoke. Only the sound of slurping soup and occasional distant gunshots broke the silence. After the morning artillery strike and the afternoon reconnaissance mission, everyone was physically and mentally drained. Weariness and sorrow hung on their faces, their eyes clouded with uncertainty. No one knew how much longer the war would last or if they would live to see its end. After dinner, Sergeant Muller began arranging the night watch. "Stay extra vigilant tonight," he said solemnly. "The French are likely to launch a surprise attack under cover of darkness. Well, split into 3 shifts, each lasting 2 hours. First shift, 1930 to 21:30, Hans and Peter. Second shift, 2200 hours to midnight, Carl and Thomas. Third shift, 0:30 to 2:30, Eric and John. During your watch, keep a close eye on the front. If you spot anything unusual, fire a warning shot immediately." "Understood," everyone replied in unison. With the watch assignments complete, Sergeant Muller told everyone to rest while they could, saving their strength for any nighttime dangers. You returned to your foxhole, lying down on the cold ground and pulling the army blanket over you. But sleep eluded you. Scenes from the day replayed in your mind. The deafening artillery blasts, the screams of your comrades, the French soldier's body, your mother's letter. These images intertwined, leaving you restless. Hans beside you was already asleep, snoring softly. He was utterly exhausted, his strength drained by the morning's shelling and the day's labor. Eric sat in his foxhole, cleaning his hand grenades with focused, unwavering eyes. He was preparing for the possibility of night combat. You looked up at the night sky beyond the trench. The stars were bright like countless diamonds scattered across the black canvas. Yet the darkness of the battlefield wrapped around you like a suffocating net. You thought of the night sky back home, just as bright but without the gunfire or the stench of gunpowder. There was only the chirping of crickets and the sound of your family's laughter. Those were such beautiful times. Gone forever, it seemed. Time crept by and soon it was 2200 hours. You and Thomas relieved Hans and Peter, beginning your night watch. Thomas was a soldier around your age, quiet and introverted, rarely speaking. The two of you took positions at separate firing ports along the trench, propping up your rifles and scanning the front intently. The battlefield was unusually quiet at night, with only the sound of your own heartbeat and occasional coughs drifting over from the French lines. You put on a simple Starlight night vision goggle, equipment that the German army had begun equipping second-line positions with in small quantities in 1916. It allowed you to see distant objects clearly by starlight. Through the goggles you examined the no-man's land ahead, daring not to let your guard down for a moment. As time dragged on in silence, boredom and drowsiness washed over you, but you fought to stay awake, continuing your vigil. You knew the night was the most dangerous time. The French might launch a surprise attack under cover of darkness or send scouts to sabotage your barbed wire and trenches. Suddenly you spotted several dark figures moving in the no-man's land ahead. You held your breath and watched closely. There were about 5 of them crawling forward with light practiced movements, clearly trained professionals. You immediately realized they were French scouts, likely targeting your barbed wire. Enemies! You shouted, firing a warning shot. Bang! The sound echoed sharply in the quiet night. You squeezed the trigger, aiming at one of the figures. Bang! The bullet struck its mark and the shadow fell motionless to the ground. At the sound of gunfire, the heavy machine guns on your position erupted, the staccato rattle of gunfire filling the air as bullets rained down on the French scouts. Seeing this, the remaining scouts scrambled to retreat, quickly disappearing into the darkness. The skirmish lasted 10 minutes. The French made no further attempts to attack, and the battlefield fell silent once more. You let out a sigh of relief, your palms soaked with sweat. The sudden confrontation had left you trembling with nervousness. Sergeant Muller rushed over at the sound of gunfire. "What happened?" he asked. "Sergeant, 5 French scouts tried to approach our barbed wire. We spotted them. I hit one and the rest retreated," you replied. Sergeant Muller nodded, patting your shoulder in approval. "Well done, Carl. You spotted them just in time to stop them from sabotaging our position. Keep your eyes peeled." "Understood, Sergeant," you nodded. After Sergeant Muller left, you returned to your post at the firing port. Though you'd successfully repelled the scouts, you felt no joy, only a wave of nausea. It was the first time you'd shot an enemy directly. You wondered if he was still alive and if his family was waiting for him to come home. Once you'd been a baker's apprentice, spending your days making delicious bread and bringing happiness to people. Now you were forced to kill. The thought filled you with intense pain and confusion. What was this war for? Why did so many innocent lives have to be lost? At midnight, your watch with Thomas ended and Eric and John took over. You returned to your foxhole utterly exhausted. Hans had been woken by the gunfire. Rubbing his eyes, he asked Carl, "What happened?" "It's nothing, just a few French scouts. We chased them off," you replied, briefly lying down on the ground. You closed your eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Scenes from the day replayed in your mind. The morning artillery strike, the screams of your comrades, the French soldier's body, your mother's letter, the moment you'd shot the scout. All swirling together, leaving you restless. You had no idea how much longer these days would last or if you'd survive the war. You even began to doubt if you'd ever see your beloved mother and father again. You thought of Eric's stories about the Battle of the Somme, the comrade who'd been buried in the trench that morning, and the French scout you'd shot. Fear gripped you, the fear of death. You were terrified of dying on this cruel battlefield, never to return home to your family. Time passed slowly, and soon it was 2:30. You heard the creak of the logistic soldier's tin cart. Breakfast for the new day was on its way. You climbed slowly to your feet and walked to the edge of the trench, looking eastward. The sky was already streaked with faint light. A new day was about to begin. Standing there facing the cold night wind, your heart was filled with confusion and helplessness. You had no idea what the day would bring. Artillery strikes, reconnaissance missions, or death. You didn't know if you'd live to see its end, but you knew you had no choice but to hold on. For your family, for the chance to return home, you had to survive. Distant artillery began to rumble again, as if opening the curtain on the new day. You tightened your grip on your rifle, your eyes holding a glimmer of determination. No matter what dangers lay ahead, you would face them bravely. Because deep in your heart you clung to a conviction. The war would end eventually, peace would return, and you would make it home to your family. The dawn's first light gradually illuminated the battlefield. A new day had begun, and you, Karl Schultz, an ordinary German soldier, would continue to struggle for survival in this hellish place. Your story was just a microcosm of the countless ordinary soldiers caught in World War I. And this brutal war still raged on,